Okay, so this is a podcast where I'm like really kind of just showing my age. And I'm going to be like one of them old guys I used to listen to growing up in Henry County, Kentucky. And there's a point in your life that you're going to be like, you know, back in my day, well, we did this. Well, it's going to be one of those things. I am Jonathan Mertz, and welcome to Jonathan Mertz, just talking about whatever. Hey, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast. Leave a review if you don't mind. Thank you all so much. Follow me on Twitter at Jonathan Mertz, as well as on Instagram at Jonathan Mertz, and subscribe to my TikTok page. It's again at Jonathan Mertz. Just think about this. Just over 25 years ago, one of the first forms of social media started with instant messaging and chat rooms. ICQ was one of the best web-based apps that everyone went to meet new people and to find the latest gossip and trends in those chat rooms, as well as just the instant messaging portion that was isolated from the chat rooms as well. But just a small portion of people even knew about this technology. I was one of them and got to use it frequently, as well as AOL Messenger, which came out later, and Yahoo Messenger and Yahoo chat rooms and all that stuff came out later too, which predated Facebook Messenger. Think about that, okay? Because Facebook didn't even exist at this time. And the reason that people didn't know about this technology is as it was still in the early stages of the internet. And during this time, many people still didn't have access to the internet. And the internet really wouldn't bloom into what it is until the 2000s. So what did we do before social media? Well, come on this journey with me, and I'll explain to you the adventures of the world offline. So picture this, back in the late 1980s, cell phones are really starting to pick up, but really wouldn't start really booming until the 1990s. And in the late 80s to early 90s, there was only one or two cell phone carriers in rural Kentucky that even gave any type of coverage. And the phones didn't have caller ID, nor instant messaging, or access to the internet for that matter. Because the internet was still in its infancy at that time. As I mentioned in the intro, it was about 1996 when ICQ's instant messaging and chat room kind of launched into play. And the only way to get that access to that app was to use a dial-up modem that, when dialed, sounded like this. Ooh, those were good sounds back in the day. I tell you, it was spectacular. And yes, we loved hearing those sounds because it means, everything sounds like it's making connections and it's going through, and then it finally connects. And then you're on the net. And then you find out how slow dial-up really, really is, as you still have it later as newer speeds start to come out. You all did not have to deal with this in this new age. And finding ICQ and finding all these apps out there was very hard because the search engines aren't what they are today. Before AOL, there was Netscape, and that was what everybody pretty much used. It was the browser of choice, way before Internet Explorer, way before Chrome and Firefox and Safari. But this podcast is not about online life. This podcast is about what do we do beforehand? Because even with all of this access to the internet, and even in its infancy, in the beginning, it was still something you had to pay for. It's something that was costly. You had to buy a computer. If the computer didn't have a modem in it, you had to install the modem. Yeah, the modems used to sit inside the computers and not on your shelf like they do for DSL modems that came out later, and even your cable modems of today to give you access to the internet. So, what did we do in our downtime offline? And for many people, they never got online during this time. So this, what I'm about to tell you, was the norm. So what people did before social media, which meant they pretty much lived offline, it actually varied across the United States. And that's where I'm going to focus because that's where I grew up, is in the United States. I actually just grew up in Kentucky. I didn't grow up anywhere else across this vast country. And it's very different from everybody. So what did people do in general? Well, they did a lot of stuff. They went to concerts, just like they do today. They went to the movies. They stayed home, obviously. They went horseback riding. They went jogging. They went playing sports. They went to camps. Basically almost everything you can do today that's offline, we were doing in some fashion or form in the 1980s and 1990s, before the internet really exploded and social media came on the scene. But what about me? What did I do? Me, I grew up in a small town in Eminence, Kentucky. So, as like I said in my very first episode, in that town is a rural class city, which have never really hit over 3,000 people ever. And you're actually limited to who you could interact with in a way, right? It's a small town. You're going to interact with a lot of people, but there's not always a lot of people your same age. I graduated with a class of 32 people at the Eminence Independent School, which means from that class, there was only 32 of us, not hundreds like you have in some of the bigger county schools. I mean, even Henry County High School, which was a separate school, had maybe a class of 150 upward. I'm taking a guess. I don't really know. But I know they had 100 or more in those graduating classes. In some of the schools down the road in Jefferson County, which is where Louisville, Kentucky is, had 200, 300, 400 students in classes. So our friendships were bonded through people we met by going out. Because we didn't meet them online. We didn't have PS5 gaming consoles that connected us. We didn't have Xbox consoles that connected us with live chat, because that's newer iterations of PlayStation and Xbox. Our PlayStation and Xboxes didn't have those features. As a matter of fact, my first console was an Atari, then the NES, then the Super NES, and then later the PlayStation and Xbox. So, our life was our friends. And it was outside of the house for the most part. I played sports, which, okay, cool. I mean, it's youth league sports. I mean, I did play sports in high school as well. I was on the basketball team. I was on the baseball team. I played golf. And, okay, cool. It's something you do. You get some camaraderie built up. I played Little League baseball and we call junior pro basketball. It wasn't like the travel leagues that you see today, because it was all in the county. We never left the county for any of that. Even when we played middle school basketball, it was still, you were still pretty close by. Even with some of the schools, we didn't travel super, super far. Every now and then we would travel, several counties over, but, we didn't go out of state like some of these travel leagues do. But the school that I was in was K through 12. So many of the friends that I made are the ones I grew up with. And we hung out and we got in trouble together. So what exactly did we do? Well, in rural Kentucky, it was just hanging out. Eminence was this happening town back in the day where they had this thing called cruising. And if you hear like what cruising, okay, what is cruising? Well, Eminence is kind of laid out in maybe a mile and a half wide of a city, okay? And you have a town that has a strip of streets. Not very many, but there is Main Street and then there's Broadway. And the strip on Main Street would pretty much go for about close to a mile to half a mile. And then we would turn down Broadway and we would go about a mile to half a mile down that way, make a loop back and make a huge kind of like circle pattern between these two streets. And this went on for decades. Decades. This cruising went on. It stopped now. Some old fogies came in. Hey, we gotta get rid of these cruisers right here. And guess what happened when they did? The town business went down. Businesses went under. Just because they stopped in and stopped something they did not like. It's too noisy. They're making our cops work too much. We're paying out too much money. No, they're not. Guess what? They're paying more money into that town than they were out of it. So things like that kind of irritate me if you can't tell already. But that's what we did when we got to the driving age. And even before the driving age, we were driving our bicycles uptown if we were allowed to, at a certain age. But before that, let me go back even further to my youth, even younger youth. My street on Hillcrest was filled with kids growing up from all kinds of backgrounds. And we got together all the time to play backyard football, baseball, basketball, you name it. We were there. We were having fun, hanging out at each other's houses. Went over. Hey, Mom, I'm going to such and such. All right, be back before dark. We just walk, mile, 2 miles down the road to the friend's house. Or they would just show up out of the blue to our house. Mom would accept them in. Come on, we'll feed them snacks, everything else. That's just the way it was. It really was. And we had to think outside the box when we went to play. We played tag, we played hide and go seek. And we got into some mischievous stuff too. Don't get me wrong. Throwing rocks at cars and things like that growing by. Even hitting a principal's vehicle once. It wasn't me, but can't say that I wasn't trying to hit it at one point. Or made it at least look like I was and didn't really hit it, but my friend with a big wad of rocks helped at the side of that. Needless to say, we ran and jumped a fence and that person didn't catch us. Didn't even really say who it was. But yeah, we did stupid stuff over the years. But it was the social aspect of it. Clowning around, cutting up with the friends. Just talking, communicating, one-on-one. Having conversations about maybe movies we saw. Because back then you had to go to the video stores for the most part to get movies. You can't get them online. You can't stream them. You actually had to go in there and look at the covers of the movies. It basically looked like a cover of a book. And you had to judge whether you were going to watch that movie by looking at that cover of the book. And sometimes you turn it around the back to read what it was about. And it was a crapshoot because you did not know what it was. It's kind of like going on Netflix and say, play me something. And it just comes up with anything. And then you have to sit there and watch it and see if you like it or not. And really, that was an experience in itself. It really, really was. And sometimes you're told about movies and you're like watching it like, I really don't like this. And the other times you're like, oh, that was so good. You know, because you're surprised. Because you took a chance on something. And that is exactly what the world was like back then. You know, we had toys. You know, I had He-Man. I had the Thundercats. I had Transformers, Ninja Turtles. You know, you name it. We kind of had those toys too. Okay? And they were the first generation toys, by the way. They weren't the second, the third, the 100 generations. We had the original Power Rangers toys. We had all of this stuff. You know, the original G.I. Joes, you know, at least from a cartoon standpoint. I think G.I. Joe actually started way before the cartoon. Because I think it was a lot taller toy, if I remember correctly, before the cartoon. And that was before me. So me getting to know that, it was like, hey, you know, back in my day, we had this taller toy. It wasn't that much older, but at least 10 maybe. And you had the Star Wars toys and stuff. And Star Wars was like in 1970 something. I was born in 79, so that was the first, like 77, I think is the first film. And then the 81, 82, 83, somewhere around there is the second and third films came out. I got to watch all of them in the 80s, just not right when they first came out because I was too young to even remember them. But those films molded me, and I remember buying toys, the Star Wars toys as well. But we just got out. And fortunately, I grew up in a family that liked to go out and do things. My aunts and uncles would always ask me to come over and play with their kids and took me out camping. And my mom and dad did too, but more so with my aunts and uncles always getting me out. And that's where I got introduced into music. It was with my aunts and uncles. And they would always play these little kind of like venues. And in Henry County, Kentucky, there is a unique venue called the 6 Mile Jamboree. And it is a place where young and old go and dance the night away. They don't sell alcohol there, although people bring it in and they're like, oh, solo cup. This is not in a bottle. They go out in their car and they pour it in there. And they come back in and they get all sloshed while they're in there. Woo! But I tell you what. Now, it is a smoky place because smoking still today, it still happens. And kids from infancy to on up are in that place because it's technically a family, venue. Obviously, they still have security there. They even had security when I was there. So if somebody gets too unruly, too drunk or whatever, they just, kick them out or arrest them. Depends on, because a lot of them's off-duty cops that work that. So, I mean, it was there, but I never felt like it was a dangerous place growing up at all. Obviously, the secondhand smoke today considered pretty dangerous. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I don't know if it's the right environment for everybody to be going in, but hey, to each their own, right? Yeah, exactly. So that's where I spent many nights as I could. I would always call one of my uncles when I knew he was playing there. It's like, hey, can I go with you? Because I wanted to be there. I loved that environment. I loved the dance. I was watching the band. I was so intrigued with everything that was going on. And I remember getting tired as a kid and being able to sleep through the whole commotion and being so loud in there, I could just fall asleep on the table. And it's loud music playing everywhere. And it's also something that's so dear to me because that's where I met my wife, was in that very venue. Isn't that interesting? So, outside of just hanging out, going to this place, what else did we do? Well, the normal stuff, fishing, hunting. If you're into that type of stuff, not everybody was. But for the most part, we didn't do a whole lot other than socialize. That was our entire life, was socializing, which is the reason that social media was designed, which was to give you something that you could do online like it is in real life without being socially awkward. Because some people just couldn't talk to people in person very well because they were introverts, and we really didn't understand that until the internet broke through and let introverts actually have a voice. And some of them became socialites behind the computer. But in real life, they were this shell of person who was hiding. But But online, they could be anybody they wanted to be. And they could explode into this powerful being. And then sometimes they can be complete assholes. If I'm being honest. Because the trolls started even back then. People just didn't hear about it because it wasn't as popular. Some of these chat rooms, people get tear up. Trolls aren't anything new. Bullying isn't anything new. It's been happening throughout the millennia and eons. But you learn to just ignore it and roll on. Now, don't get me wrong. People still committed suicide because of bad situations in their minds or in their life that they felt they'd rather be out and then end. There were still people like that. And that's been happening for, well, the millennia as well. Now, that being said, it didn't seem like that was such a problem growing up. And again, maybe it was because we didn't hear about everything going on, because it wasn't broadcast everywhere. And maybe just people just didn't talk about it because they were more private. I don't know. But I do know how I felt when my friends would get together, how we would get together, how we would hang out, we would have these sleepovers, we would do all kinds of stuff. I'm telling you, that close interaction is something much more different than what you get with the interaction of people online. And even if you're doing voice chats or face chats online with people, like with his Omegle or whatever it's called. I'm sorry, I really just don't know what that app or that website is very well. So if I butchered that, I'm sorry if anybody uses that. But you get this closeness that you don't get when you're not in front of somebody. And you hear people today that said they met somebody online. That's how they got their whole interaction. When they get in person, it's very awkward because the first interaction wasn't in person. Let me tell you right now, if you can get past the awkward phase when you first meet somebody in real life and you've never talked to them online, that's a good feeling. It's a much more rewarding feeling than meeting somebody online and then going to meet them in person and you're like, hey, how you doing? And I've met people who I've interviewed that way or had to interview that way through the radio station. And you get to go meet some either celebrities or you're meeting just some town, person promoting an event or something. And you've been, chatting with them either through emails or on the phone, and then you go to meet them and they're not quite what you imagined, but it's awkward even because all your interactions were online or in through email, and your perception of them was far different than what they actually were. So if you actually had met them right off the bat, you may have had a totally different opinion about that person. Isn't that interesting? But yeah, adventures, finding your own adventures, going to parks, going to hiking, going camping, going boating, tubing and being pulled behind a boat, skiing, whatever. These are things that we did as a kid. We got out, we had adventures, horseback riding. I'm telling you, festivals after festival after festival, when the fair season was kicking in, we were hopping in different counties, going to different fairs, going to the state fair. We got out, we had an adventure. And that's what life was like. It was an adventure outside of social media. It still can be. And many people still do these. You see people posting pictures about them going out and actually doing something. People are like, wow, that's cool. How'd you get up the courage to do it? They just went and did it. But for some, it's intimidating. And I'm sorry that you hear my dog whining in the background. I'm going to let him out. I'm almost done with this podcast anyways. But it is very intimidating for some of them. So get out, enjoy yourself, and go have an adventure while I leave you and take my dog out. Anyways, make sure you're following the podcast. Follow me online at Jonathan Mertz at Twitter, at Instagram, and on TikTok. And until next time, talk to you later.